pro-abortion groups Planned Parenthood and the American Civil Liberties Union are suing Missouri over an abortion ban. The pro-abortion groups filed a federal lawsuit last week to stop a Missouri law banning abortions beyond the 8th week of pregnancy from taking effect later this month. They argue it's unconstitutional. If the courts do not uphold the 8-week ban, the bill includes a series of other bans ranging from 14 to 20 weeks. It also bans abortions that discriminate based on race, sex, or a potential Down syndrome diagnosis. Missouri's Republican Governor Mike Parson signed the bill into law in May. This Missouri case is seen as a potential case that could make its way up to the Supreme Court as a challenge to Roe v. Wade, the 1973 Supreme Court decision legalizing abortion nationwide. It's one out of the recent flurry of other pro-life bills recently signed into law, ranging from Alabama to Arkansas. To discuss this pro-life momentum and whether or not we'll likely see Roe v. Wade overturned, we spoke with a top law expert who has had his own cases argued in Supreme Court, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. He recently joined us in studio. Here's our interview. Joining us now is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
With a wave of recent pro-life laws, we've seen growing speculation that Roe v. Wade might be overturned. As your state's Attorney General, someone whose cases have been heard in the Supreme Court multiple times, do you foresee Roe v. Wade being overturned?
I have always believed that. The reason I've been in this fight for so long is I've always believed that we had the opportunity. I think it's clearly unconstitutional. I was in law school. The professors admitted that it was made up, that there was no precedent for it. There was no statutory authority. It's as unconstitutional of a law that we have. And so I've always been optimistic that if we get judges in these courts that respect the Constitution and what was actually meant by the Constitution, that we would overturn Roe v. Wade eventually.
Are there any particular state laws or policies that you see as the most likely case to challenge Roe?
You know, you never know. You never know like what the timing is going to be. You don't know exactly what one's going to make it up to the Supreme Court. You know, it could be something like the heartbeat bill, or you never know what they're going to decide when they're going to decide to take a certain type of case and invalidate the whole law.
And as a legal expert, can you clarify what would happen legally with abortion if Roe v. Wade is overturned?
So then it would go back to the states. I mean, before Roe v. Wade, Texas had laws that protected the unborn, and that was overturned. It was overturned in every state with a swoop of a pen by 7 Supreme Court justices. Our argument has always been it's a state's issue, and each state would have the opportunity to decide what they wanted the law to be. Clearly, in my state, I think we would be much more restrictive than the abortions law are now, and potentially, hopefully, ban it. But other states might not do the same thing, and people will have the opportunity, though, to at least have votes on it. Elected representatives that can be unelected or elected based on their votes.
Speaking of your pro-life leadership, you recently asked the U.S. Supreme Court to block abortion clinics and abortion providers from challenging pro-life state laws on behalf of their patients. Why is this important?
Because they don't have standing, really. We don't believe they have standing to sue. There's no harm to them. The harm is supposedly to these patients that aren't able to get abortions, and so they shouldn't be able to step in the shoes. You normally have standing rules as to who can sue and who can't, and they shouldn't have the opportunity to basically violate standing rules and step into the shoes when they're not suffering harm.
I also want to get your take on a Texas congressional race. Wendy Davis is announcing a run for Congress. She rose to fame because of that 13-hour abortion bill filibuster. You were there. What should Texas voters know about Wendy Davis?
Well, I mean, I worked with her in her Senate. She's not the most conservative legislator I've ever seen. She's also not pro-life, clearly fought hard to restrict the ability of Texas to actually stop Texas from being able to restrict certain abortion providers from doing certain things, like really simple regulations like other surgical centers have. She fought to prevent us to be able to do it. So she has a pretty unreasonable view on the life issue, and I would argue she has unreasonable views on some other issues as well.
Do you think that's going to be a competitive race?
You know, it's really hard to know. It'll depend a lot on how the presidential race is going and who the Democrats put up and who obviously we have Trump running as a Republican. So it'll depend on how competitive that is. But I mean, I think that she'll lose.
Finally, I know the pro-life issue is a personal one to your family. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So my wife was adopted, and it was prior to Roe v. Wade. And we've always known that her mother decided to give her life. We have 4 children, and we've also had the opportunity to meet Angela's birth mother, who's a wonderful person. And I think it's been really neat. As Angela's adopted mother has passed away, she has a relationship with her birth mother, and they have a very close relationship. She's met her sisters and brothers and aunts and uncles, and obviously if Roe v. Wade had been in place, or she'd made a different decision, we'd have a different result. My children obviously wouldn't be here, and obviously I wouldn't have had the time that I've had with her.
Well, I'm grateful to hear that story and grateful that you're here with us. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, thank you.
Thank you.
Joining us now in studio to discuss the role of the courts in the pro-life movement is Prudence Robertson, a communications associate for the Susan B. Anthony List. Prudence, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
First off, can you speak to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's leadership in the pro-life movement? What do his legal actions mean in these wider efforts to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Absolutely. Ken Paxton is a longtime pro-life leader. Before he served as Attorney General, he served in the state legislature where he championed pro-life laws that included informed consent, health and safety regulations, as well as stopping late-term abortion. As Attorney General, he has led the charge in investigating Planned Parenthood and their role in harvesting and selling baby body parts. And he ultimately was a key figure in getting Planned Parenthood kicked out of Texas's Medicaid program altogether. So having strong pro-life leaders as Attorney General like Ken Paxton is really key in getting these laws pushed forward and advanced in the states.
That's really helpful insight. I want to hone in now on this specific Missouri case and the news surrounding it. Can you break down this Missouri pro-life law that's being legally challenged?
Absolutely, yes. So it's called the Missouri Stands for the Unborn Act, and it's really one of the most pro-life pieces of legislation that we've ever seen. Some viewers may remember Sue Liebel. She works for Susan B. Anthony List, and she's been working very hard with pro-life men and women in the Missouri legislature to pass this law. And it's really what we like to call a kitchen sink type of legislation because of all of the provisions that it includes. It has an 8-week limit on abortion as well as a limit after 5 months, which is when science proves that babies can feel intense pain while undergoing an abortion. It also includes a ban on discriminatory abortions that are performed because it is found that the baby is a certain gender or that it has a disability such as Down syndrome. And as you know, the ACLU recently filed a lawsuit against this legislation asking a federal judge in the Fifth Circuit to overturn the law. And the reason they're going after the entire law is because of how comprehensive it is. It truly is such a pro-life win. It's a great piece of legislation, and it's in a pro-life state. Missouri voters, 82% of them, believe that there should be a law that stops late-term abortion, and we believe that their will should be respected in this case.
That being said, what's the likelihood of this being the case to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, it's very likely that a piece of legislation like this could challenge Roe. I mean, there are a lot of provisions in it, and the Supreme Court could choose to take up each one individually or none of them at all. It really depends on what happens right now in the lower courts. Susan B. Anthony List is monitoring 3 different types of cases. So we have pain-capable cases that stop late-term abortion. We have cases that include health and safety regulations to protect women. And we have cases that include discriminatory abortion bans, like this Missouri law does. And ultimately the Supreme Court chooses which cases it will take up. But we believe at Susan B. Anthony List that these types of cases present the best challenge to Roe.
Prudence, there are over a dozen cases currently pending in federal circuit courts that could be appealed in the Supreme Court in the future. Why are we seeing such an uptick in abortion-related cases?
It's true. We're seeing a lot of pro-life legislation, bold legislation, being introduced in states all across the country, and that's because lawmakers are responding to the extreme abortion agenda that we've seen in New York and Virginia and other places. And they're also responding to President Trump and the way that he has transformed the courts by confirming a record number of pro-life judges. And the fact of the matter is that Roe v. Wade legalized abortion up until the minute of birth, and that truly is such a radical thing. And as more and more Americans realize that that is the national status quo today, they're calling for these pro-life laws.
Thank you for all of that helpful background and insight. Prudence Robertson with the Susan B. Anthony List. Thank you.
Thanks so much.